At this World Climate Conference in Bonn, there was a lot more discussion about carbon removal than, for example, a year ago in Marrakesh. But most of the discussion took place in the sidelines, in the side events by various civil society organizations, business groups, etc., and not in the official negotiations. Now there are different groups of interest, many who believe that it is still possible to reach the 1.5 degrees through very much accelerated emission reductions and very intensive emission reductions. And there are others who believe that that is not the case. But there is no political consensus, and there has been certainly no proper discussion of the extent to which it is possible to do that. I believe we might see that later, perhaps next year, when the first facilitative dialogue will take place, where countries' emission reduction efforts will be considered. Next year, in 2018, we will have the special report on the 1.5 degree pathway prepared by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that, together with the first, what is called a facilitative dialogue, where countries, parties to the UNFCCC, will look at what is the total impact of the mitigation efforts that they're undertaking on the temperature target of the Paris Agreement. And those two together will inevitably lead some, depending on how that looks like, some will interpret that as things are going in the right direction, and with all these plans in place it will be possible to reach those targets. Others will interpret them differently, and they will then say that one needs to consider other options, in particular make more intensive use of the negative emissions. That is a possibility next year. It is fairly clear that you can only put so much carbon in the atmosphere, and if we want to keep those temperature goals, as indeed most of the scenarios that the IPCC has considered so far, they tend to indicate that without a certain use of negative emissions, it will be difficult to reach those targets. Now, which negative emission technologies? How much of those technologies, at which price, at which time, those are discussions that have to be had, but they have to be had in a broad context involving civil society, involving governments, involving scientific circles, and of course the private sector. All of those different stakeholders will have a view. We are getting increasing assurance from all these different communities that it is actually a good idea to talk about these issues. This is not about making use of these technologies, whether we are pro or against. We are trying to remain neutral. That is our way of approaching these issues, but there is very good support from all these different constituencies that there is need to discuss these issues, and we need to discuss these issues through a society-wide debate, which means that the different stakeholders, the civil society, the business groups, the governments, the science groups, the faith groups, they all need to have an input.